Borodar Paub, welcome everyone to this WEN Cafe on a very important subject, which is no recourse to public funds. May I ask us all panelists to mute for now, please, until I come to you? That would be really helpful. Thank you so much. So my name is Catherine Fuchs. I'm the Director of Women's Equality Network Wales. Our vision is a Wales free from gender discrimination. I'm sure you may know, we're a membership organisation, and please do join us. If you are not already a member, you should be a member, because together, of course, the louder our voice will be, the more members we have. So please do join us. And this topic that we are talking about today on no recourse to public funds is incredibly important to WEN Wales. We've been concerned about it for a long time. And you're in the right place to find out from our incredible panel here what no recourse to public funds means, what it is, and how it impacts women in particular. So it's very much on the agenda at the moment because there have been some really interesting developments, positive developments on this in Scotland. The Equality and Social Justice Committee inquiry here in Wales also has reported recently and made some recommendations, and Welsh Government have committed to some improvements. So we're really pleased to be here today to hear about these different aspects of no recourse to public funds. The webinar will run in this way. I'm going to ask our panel some questions at the beginning shortly. Also, two of my wonderful colleagues are here to share some lived experience. And then the minister will be brought in, and the Social Justice Minister, Jane Hutt, will be brought in, and she's going to answer a couple of questions. And then we'll be open to your questions, which you can post using the Q&A function or the chat. I'm sure Jess, my colleague behind the scenes, will tell you how to post your questions in the chat. So thank you very much. And without further ado, I'd really like to ask my first question to the fantastic Wanjiku Mbugua, who is the acting CEO of BAWSO. So Wanjiku, if you can briefly explain for us what no recourse to public funds means and how it relates to your work at BAWSO. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Catherine. Thank you, Minister. Thank you all for inviting me to this event here today. No recourse to public funds is a condition that applies to most migrants when they first arrive in the UK. It's imposed by the Home Office when people are getting visas to come into the UK. They have that condition that says that they're not entitled to any welfare benefits, meaning that they're not able to access housing and other forms of support that requires them to use public funds. How does it relate to our work? For those that may not know, BAWSO supports victims of violence against women, domestic abuse, and sexual violence for Black and minoritized women and girls. And as a lot of migrants fall under our work, we see a lot of people come to us with no recourse to public funds. And one thing that the no recourse to public funds status does to a woman is that it makes them very vulnerable to domestic abuse. We all know that domestic abuse is about power and control. So at the moment, when the woman has no recourse to public funds, she has no power. And the person that has sponsored her into the country has the power in that, especially for married women on spousal visas, their visa is dependent on the person that has invited her over to the UK or the person that has brought her over to the UK as a spouse. So when a woman, during the time that she's waiting for her visa to be processed, because it takes either 3 years or 5 years, during this time of 3 years or 5 years, this woman is very vulnerable and domestic abuse takes place. Remember that this time should be dependent on the sponsor, on the spouse, for any financial needs, and she has not got any money on her. She's likely to be exploited and abused. She is dependent fully on this person to support them. The abuser, on the other hand, because they're perpetrators of domestic abuse, they'll use this opportunity, this vulnerability that the woman is facing, to take advantage of them, to abuse them, to exploit them. And what they're saying to them, because this is what women have said to us, is that the abuser keeps repeating to them, even if you go to the police, they won't do anything, and you're more likely to be sent back to your home country. And if this woman has a child, she'll be reminded, don't forget your child belongs to this country. They will not allow you to take this child with you. So this is a condition that is used by abusers to make women even more vulnerable, to make them very dependent on them, and even to stop them from seeking the support that they may need, because you're afraid to report to the police, because you think as soon as you report to the police, as he's been saying, you're going to be deported back to your home country. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Wanjiku. That was a really helpful rundown of how it impacts women and how vulnerable this makes them feel. And yeah, it just allows that space to open up, doesn't it, to exploitation, which is terrible. So that brings me on really nicely to Sarah's. I'm sorry about my dog, if you can hear my dog. Oh no. Sarah's question: what policy changes do we need? Sorry, apologies, I haven't introduced Sarah yet. Sarah is the CEO of Welsh Women's Aid. And it's fantastic of you to come. Thank you, Sarah. So what policy changes do we need to ensure these women receive the support they need?
Thank you, Catherine. And it's lovely to see everybody. It feels like a very hard act to follow. And I feel Wanjiku really captured the case of what harms no recourse to public funds really can have for survivors of domestic abuse and those who are experiencing gender-based oppression. And one of the things that I'm going to talk about within my wish for policy changes, I guess the thing I would say first is to talk about clarity and transparency of policy, because perpetrators weaponize all state systems. It's what they do. They weaponize anything and they turn it into a way to oppress someone. One of the things that is incredibly difficult, even for fellow professionals, as evidenced by this webinar, is understanding the process, understanding the system. And so when someone is a migrant, when someone is subject to no recourse to public funds, having a clear understanding of what is still available to them, what the parameters are, would reduce the ability of perpetrators to weaponize that status. I think the next thing I have to say is that I truly welcome the comments which were made in the Senate very recently, and an absolute commitment to a last resort fund based on the recommendations of the Equality and Social Justice Committee. And that's been something that we've been sort of working together with colleagues and Welsh Government and the national advisors, for VAWSO advisors for a while, sort of building a case for and recognising that while actually immigration is not a devolved matter, there are things which are within the scope of the Senedd to make people's lives in Wales that much easier and that much better. So a huge round of applause from me to get that started, get that moving, and to get that happening as soon as possible. Because every day that passes, another migrant survivor is experiencing that abuse and oppression and having no place to turn. I think in terms of policy change, policy priorities that I would like to see, some really clear policy change that I would like to see, which relates to no recourse to public fund, is a clear firewall between survivor support services and immigration control. Trust and confidence of migrant survivors will have been damaged partly by the weaponization of state structures, so the narrative from perpetrators, partly because they are on the back foot, they will have been excluded from things like state funds, and partly because there is a threat from immigration for some survivors. If there is not a firewall between emergency and ongoing support for survivors of domestic abuse and sexual violence, and their information and details being passed to immigration control, they will not access that support. support. And that is a huge, huge barrier. And we have to recognise that those things are connected and that we are creating a barrier which survivors do not feel safe to cross. And that's not okay. I think the second thing that I would say is really important in terms of a policy priority is that while there are structures and mechanisms to allow someone who is escaping abuse to have their status altered via the domestic violence destitution scheme, again, information and clarity on that is not clear enough to survivors, and also the timeliness of that decision making is challenging. So those would be the things that I would hope to see changed. They're not necessarily policy so much as the timeliness and the clarity of policy.
Okay, thank you, Sara, and thank you for raising and explaining the firewall. When you first mentioned that, I couldn't quite understand what that was, but that's very clear. Yeah, that we need this space so people can report safely without feeling that the home they are then going to be dobbed into the Home Office and then not be allowed to stay. So this is a really good time to introduce my two wonderful colleagues here, Evelyn, James, and Joyce and Njini. And Evelyn is the Diverse 50/50 campaign manager. Joyce is the Equal Power, Equal Voice mentoring program manager. And Evelyn is just going to share, I asked Evelyn, Evelyn would like to share some of her experiences of no recourse to public funds first, and then I'll come to you, Joyce. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Catherine, for having me. And thank you so much to our awesome panelists. Thank you, Social Justice Minister Jen Hutt. Thank you, Sara. Thank you, Wanjiku. You're all amazing. I'm glad that you've created this opportunity to talk about this very important issue, which I feel it's something that needs to be done, something needs to change about the system. And I just hope with my story, with a little bit of what I've experienced, which I know other people have experienced worse, that something can truly change and something can be done for people like me and for other women out there going through worse situations. So as you know, I came in as an international student to the UK, and part of the challenges I faced, as you know, is directly stamped on my residence permit, no public funds. So I do everything within my power to make sure that I sustain myself and I do all I can to take care of my needs, but they are certain challenges I cannot just avoid. My first blow or my first challenge with that was when I was looking for accommodation. I was homeless for a while. And because I fell into a hand of a hoodlum and a scammer, whom I didn't know, being an international in the country for the first time, I paid for that accommodation only for me to realize that it was a system that was set up in place to be scamming people. So I paid for a shared accommodation, and I got there. I met this woman who was a drug addict with her partner in a 2-bedroom apartment, 3 cats, 1 dog. And it was a nightmare that I couldn't imagine. There was no shower head. I wasn't allowed access to cooking facilities. I wasn't even allowed to take a shower. I'm only allowed to take a shower once in a week. And part of my job at the time was a healthcare support worker during COVID. And that means for every time that I go for shifts, I need to take a shower. I resorted to following colleagues back to their homes to at least have a shower in their houses. I didn't eat most of the time because by the time I come back, she's put the sign on the cooker that I cannot cook. I cannot use the microwave. There was lots. And so the day I decided to speak up, I said, I'm a legal tenant in your apartment. It's not like I didn't pay for this accommodation. I paid £500. I paid £500 deposit to be here. And you're treating me like this. The partner threatened me, and they both threatened me that they would call the police on me, saying I'm harassing them, being a Black person, that I've been stealing from them. And I was just at my wit's end. I worked 24-hour shifts every day, basically, just so that I would not sleep in that property. And a neighbor just had to come up to me one day and say, I see what you're going through, and I feel like you need to call the ombudsman, reach out to the council, something needs to be done about this. And I took that kind of advice, reached out to the ombudsman, called them and told them about my situation, because she, again, subletted the apartment again to another tenant outside. Is what she does. So we were already, how many occupants? 5 occupants, including the cats and the dog in the apartment, and you're subletting it out again to another person to come in. So I said, you cannot do this. It's inhumane. You can't do this. And then she told me if I wasn't able to cope, then I need to leave. And she had already packed my things and said I couldn't come back to the apartment, or she would call the police for harassment and all of that. So I reached out to the ombudsman, reported to them what the situation was. They called the police. And then suddenly I'm hearing issues of, oh, we need to check your status and what you are entitled to and what, and all of that. And by the time they put it on record, I said, I'm an international student. And they said, well, we're sorry, because you don't have access to public funds. You are not entitled to any form of benefits. The only thing you can do at this time is for you to move out of the apartment, look for somewhere else to stay while we are investigating the case. I said, where am I supposed to go to? I don't have the funds to start looking for another apartment. I don't know what they said. That's the only option at this point. It's her apartment, and we cannot come in unless a crime actually happens and all of that. So it was the most terrible time of my life. I was depressed. I was traumatized, and lest I forget to add, I was pregnant as well. So yeah.
Thank you, Evelyn.
So those are some of the challenges that we face being in that situation. So please, if there is anything that can be done, I was paying for my schooling, I've paid health surcharge, we're paying taxes. It's not like we just sit back and we're not doing anything and just taking from the government or something. I was doing something, but not having this support system in place that backs you up in that situation is horrible.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Evelyn, we were really lucky to find you to work for us at WEN. So but yeah, what Evelyn has been through is really difficult, and there are all sorts of other stories that I know she could share if we had more time. But I'm going to ask Joyce now if you can just share, and then I'll come to you, Minister, if that's okay. So Joyce, would you like to share your experience when you worked at WSAG with migrant women, and how NRPF affected the people you worked with? Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, everybody. Thank you to our fantastic panelists. Thank you, Minister, for being here. It's a privilege to be here, as always. Working at WSAG was one of the most amazing things I ever did in my life, supporting women, asylum-seeking women and refugee women and their children and families to kind of integrate within the community. But this job was not without its challenges. I'm so pleased we're talking about no recourse to public funds today, because that is one of the most obvious barriers that most of these women face in their lives, which is really a difficult position for us as well, who are meant to be supporting them. Following on from what Sara said about the need for clarity around policies put in place to support women who are already this vulnerable. I feel like that is so important, that is really needed. I worked with women who were so scared, who were going through a lot, experiencing domestic violence, but not really wanting to seek help because they were worried about their status, they were worried about being sent back home, worried about losing their children, like Wanjiku pointed out. It's just a really difficult, traumatizing place for anyone to be in. A good example, which really gave me sleepless nights, was this amazing woman who has got 3 children. She's come here with her husband, who's a student doing a doctoral degree, a PhD degree. And he's obviously the sponsor for her visa. And he's used this position of his, this powerful position of his, to abuse her and put her down in a position where she's not able to do anything at all, in a really helpless position. This woman is worried about losing her children because the issues at home, the children are experiencing the domestic violence being meted out on their mother. They are worried about complaining, about speaking out, even in school, their performances being affected in school, their mental health being affected, their well-being being affected, these children, because they are so protective of their mother. They know that, and they're aware of this situation as well. If she goes out to talk about this, they might be sent back home to Nigeria, and they don't want that to happen, which is, it was a really difficult position for me as well, where I was meant to be supporting her, empowering her, and I felt so helpless. Particularly when we decided to, after really convincing her to take a step forward and seek help from Women's Aid. Amazing as they were, they did their best, listened to her, talked to her, tried to calm her down, asked the right questions, but their hands were tied, unfortunately, because she's no recourse to public funds. It meant that they couldn't provide the much needed support that she would have benefited from. And that gave me sleepless nights because I felt totally helpless. My organization felt helpless, and you just wonder why anyone should be exposed to these difficulties just because they are migrants, just because, and she's working, she's contributing her fair bit to the Welsh society. It should only be fair enough for her to be supported when she really needs it. And yeah, I'm really just pleased that this subject is being talked about right now. And this is not alone, this wasn't a lone case. This was rampant within women that we were supporting. And it's a really difficult situation. I think something needs to be done about it, and really fast and quick.
Absolutely, Joyce. Thank you so much for sharing that, Joyce and Evelyn, both of you, for sharing your experiences. And I'd really like now, so that you said, Joyce, yeah, something needs to be done. Well, we have the Social Justice Minister here. I'm really delighted. We've got Jane Hutt here, who's got a long record of supporting women's rights. So we've got a couple of questions for you, Minister, and of course you can respond as well to other points you've heard. But our main question today is, we're really pleased Welsh Government has accepted the recommendation to establish a crisis fund for survivors. Can you tell us how it will work? And most importantly, by when will it be in place? Because it is urgent. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Catherine, and the Women's Equality Network for organising this really important meeting today. And can I just start by thanking all of the speakers, all of the panellists. It's been so powerful, the evidence that you've given today, and it's tough to give that evidence, I know, but it's so vital to help us. Anyone who has any power or responsibility has got to act on what you've said, act on your personal testimonies and also your commitments that we've had from Wanjiku and Sara in terms of the organisations at the forefront of tackling violence against women, domestic abuse and sexual violence. So, you know, thank you to you all, because, you know, I want to see this as a way that you hold me to account, obviously, timing of response to recommendations, but to clarify what we are doing and to take this forward from this meeting to any other issues or questions that you have to raise. So, of course, I want to refer immediately, as you have, Catherine, to the Equality and Social Justice Committee inquiry. what an important inquiry that was. We had such a great and powerful debate about it in the Senate, the inquiry on gender-based violence, the needs of migrant women. And, you know, it's interesting what you said, Sarah, about clarity and transparency of policy, because, you know, there were quite a few people debating that in the chamber, but, you know, you don't get any headlines. You feel that actually we really want to sort of make this much more of a public issue for people to understand what is happening. So I hope that I can take back that very strong call from you all about clarity and transparency of policy, because clearly it didn't work for you, Evelyn, and the women you support, Joyce, and now that clarity and transparency is not there. So it made 15 recommendations. I'm sure you've all seen the report. I was just saying, could we put the report on the response to the report, government report, on the chat, because it's got all the recommendations. Perhaps Jenna, who's with us, could put it on to the chat if it's functioning. We've got all of the recommendations and then all of the responses from the Welsh Government. And we accepted all of the recommendations. So just to start with the one about a crisis fund for victims with no recourse to public funds. And that, my response was very clear to that recommendation, that we're going to establish a fund as quickly as possible. I think now, you know, the question is timing, as you say, all of you, that we need to make sure that you get the timelines of when that's going to happen. Can I just also thank BAWSO and Welsh Women's Aid for doing that work with the national advisors and our officials. Everyone does work together on these issues at pace as well. And I always remember, Sarah, when you said at some meeting we had last year, I just want to tell you, Minister, that we've got this, we can do this. You know, I didn't forget that. I went straight back and said, what are we going to do? Because that's so important. I think we have got to ensure getting this fund together is partly also, obviously, it's very has a bearing on our budget, our draft budget for next year. So I had to go in front of the Equality and Social Justice Committee after Christmas to be scrutinised about the budget. You may have heard that I was questioned on this. So this shows the awareness within our committee. These are parliamentarians, they're not in government. They are led by Jenny Rathbone, the chair. You know, they are pursuing this alongside Welsh Government delivering. So I was really pleased to have that question and to say that, you know, we are going to, whatever is being set up, the funding will be there to get this emergency fund. But obviously we also want to pull in the voices of those survivors. I think Evelyn and Joyce, it's really important to have that evidence again today, and officials are with me. Jenna, you will know, is with us listening to this as well. So also learning from the pilot that has been undertaken, the SMV pilot, that has had an impact, an influence on what the needs are in Wales, and of course BAWSO being very engaged in that pilot. But we're impatient. We don't, you know, we're not waiting for outcomes of that pilot. We need to get on with it. So
can I'm so sorry to interrupt, Minister, but can I, yes, I wanted to bring Wanjiku in because I think she may have a question that she would like to put to you on that.
That's fine.
If that's okay, go Wanjiku.
Thank you so much, Minister. I'm so excited to hear that there's finally a fund for women with no recourse to public funds or victims of domestic abuse. Really excited about that. We've worked on the pilot for the last 2 years, and that has been very helpful. But as we said, it wasn't fully covering for everything, and we sought for a Welsh option. We asked for the Welsh Government to do something to support victims of domestic abuse. We've been faced with a few problems in the last 3 weeks or so. We've been contacted by Cardiff Council, Swansea Council, and Newport Council on Monday, who have all asked us, why are we placing women with no recourse to public funds in their refugees, in their commissioned refugees? And we've explained to them that actually they're in those refuges, but the money they're paying for their place in the refuge is coming from the pilot. And they've actually gone down client by client because they're micromanaging these projects, and said, but this client was in the refuge for about 3 days, during which time they didn't have any recourse. Because just to explain very quickly, Minister, when women come to us, a lot of them on spousal visa, we are able to apply for the DDVC, Destitution Domestic Violence Concession, that allows them to be entitled to benefits very quickly. It's normally a turnaround of up to 1 week, 3 to 5 days. So within that 3 to 5 days, they're saying, but then they didn't have recourse to public funds. We do not commission services to support women with no recourse to public funds. So who is paying for the workers' time, for the time that we're supporting them in the refuge? And I thought that was really petty. And also, I asked them, so where are we supposed to place these women? Nobody's looking at the work that we're doing to ensure that these women, we turn around their no recourse status to recourse. They're not looking at that. All they're looking at is that they're funded workers who work in the refuge, and for that 2 or 3 days that the woman has been there, there is no money, the person is not entitled to receive their support. I'd really want you, Minister, to give us a direction on this, because the strategy says we should not leave any woman behind. We should not turn anybody away when they're suffering from domestic abuse. As well as that, the trend is BAWSO services have supported more women with no recourse to public funds in the last 2 years than there have been women with no recourse. So the trend is changing, and we're seeing more women who have no recourse to public funds reporting domestic abuse. Local authorities are not ready for this change, and they're not listening to us. Which is the way forward? Where do we place the women that come to us who have no recourse in the first instance? And obviously, with all the ones that we've supported, within 6 months, we've turned around their situation, and they have recourse to public funds because they've received the indefinite leave to remain. No woman has been denied indefinite leave to remain within the period that we've worked with them. So just over to you, Minister, to see if you can help us in this situation.
Well, it's very worrying to hear that. I think Jenna is on the call, Jenna Turnbull, and we'll take this straight back to our local government colleagues, because this should not be happening. I don't know if they've called you in. I mean, obviously we need to take this away now, Wanjiku, and look at it, and we'll set up a meeting with the local government colleagues next week. But I'm just looking at the recommendations, which were actually we approved, went through on debate in December. And it's basically saying we have to, that stakeholders such as local authorities, the recommendation for us to engage survivors of sexual gender-based violence from migrant communities and other stakeholders such as local authorities, engaging community strategy development, awareness raising, prevention, form guidance to statutory bodies. Now this is, this all needs to happen, as well as getting the money together, the fund. We've got to actually get those who are at the sharp end in terms of, and this is obviously frontline workers as well within those councils, and I'm sure that we can work with Cardiff Women's Aid as well, and those local the local provision as well as BAWSO, but also that right the way through every recommendation, it is about local authorities particularly having to abide by this review of Social Services and Wellbeing Wales Act about the impact on migrant women with no recourse to public funds. Well, that is something which I'm going to, the Deputy Minister for Social Services, Julie Morgan, she confirmed as well, this is cross-government in her oral evidence about how they were addressing this. Of course, this also means what you've raised with me, something for the Minister for Climate Change, Julie James. So we've got, it's all there in the recommendations and in the report, everything that you've raised with me today. And I mean, I have to say, from Evelyn's evidence as well as her evidence, that that landlord was operating against the law in terms of the legislation that we've got to protect private rented sector tenants, rent smart. I mean, the lack of understanding and of the police is hugely concerning. I mean, basically, you were being exploited when you came to a country where you thought you would, as an international student. So this is for the education minister as well, I have to say. So, you know, I think I'm going to take all these things back to my colleagues as well. But I just want to say that yes, so we work on the crisis fund, but that's only one part of this. I know the money needs to be there so that you can, but it's no good if we're just paying, you know, making this allocation, which is going to have a big pressure on us in terms of this really difficult budget. If local authorities and everyone else are just saying, well, that's that kind of thing, they have got to play their part and take responsibility. That's why developing the guidance will need you to help us with that. And
can I just press on one point, Minister? I'm so sorry to interrupt, but I think people would be really keen to know when you think the fund will be in place.
Well, I was just going to my next point. I was going to say we hope to have the scheme in place within the next few weeks. I mean, spring.
Oh, wow.
Where is it? Spring 2023, they say. Well, I think spring's not far off. I mean, obviously that means, I would say that's after Easter. But we do need so we need you to be all on side to help us to get to that point. I mean, that's the scheme. That's, you know, we've got to get through the budget. We've got 1st of April, next financial year, etc. But spring 2023. But obviously what's come up today, quite a large range of issues, which are not just about the fund, they're about the guidance. And I was particularly wanting to respond to the point about data sharing and firewalls, etc., because you know that there were recommendations that we also accepted in the report from the committee around data. I think it's recommendations 11, 12 and 13, which we responded to very clearly. And one of the Quality and Social Justice Committee members, Sara Murphy, has taken on data justice as a big key issue as a sort of backbencher in the Parliament. She's really leading on it, and she's got a cross-party group on data justice. And we did have a very good discussion about data sharing and issues. Now, we've got, thank you, Catherine, for putting up the Welsh Government's response, because you know it's useful to remind us all what it was recommended, how we responded, because this is where, of course, this is going to be about not just us and local Welsh Government, local government, police, health service, all recognising what we've said about protection of data and not having that transfer of data, which has been so unjust and which we have always said we would not do in terms of GPs, etc., not happening in Wales. It isn't, and if it does, we need to know about it. So we've got a lot of work to do on this on all fronts, but I mean, as a result of today, we can take back the particular points that have been made. And, you know, as I think, you know, back to Sarah's point, it's about understanding the system and being clear about it. But I think Wanjiku and you've made the point, well, and all of you have, is that this is another way to abuse women, migrant women, that it's used by abusers. It's another form of force and control, coercive force and control, and it makes people very vulnerable to domestic abuse. So we'll, you know, we want to do everything we can, but I think we also can't leave the UK government out of this. We've got to, I'm raising this with I've raised it every time I've met the Domestic Abuse Commissioner, Nicole Jacobs. I suspect that Sara and Wanjiku have raised it with her. Now, interestingly, I've actually yesterday attended a meeting, an intergovernmental meeting, which are now taking place. They kind of came to a shuddering halt for some time, but the UK government's now got some intergovernmental meetings on, and I'm a member of the intergovernmental meeting on safety and security and migration, so which was chaired by the Home Secretary. Now, we had obviously very different views from the Home Secretary on many of the issues, myself and my colleague from Scottish Government, particularly relating to migration, the Nationality Borders Act, etc. But I was able to raise the issue, and indeed I have to say that the Home Secretary did as well, on violence against women, domestic abuse and sexual violence. So I will ask for this to be on the agenda of the next meeting. We're meeting 3 times in the year. I mean, we had quite a lot of discussion about safe and legal routes, which is what we was talking about. But I mean, that has an impact on this. This is all, if we are to have safe and legal routes, this is all about avoiding exploitation and abuse, the sort of vulnerabilities that that women find themselves, gender-based violence, then because of the lack of safe and legal routes. So it all ties up. But I will raise that. I'll ask that to be put on the agenda.
That's great.
One of the meetings, and we'll need your advice and expertise to help us with that.
Thank you, Minister. I just wondered if Sarah would like to come back in before you have to go to comment on any of that, or yeah, think about the wider reforms that are needed perhaps in Westminster. But if you've got a comment you'd like to make, Sarah, because I know the Minister can't wait till the end, so go for it.
I would love to, and I'm delighted to hear that you will continue to press the point, Minister, with the UK government. In my view, NRPF itself is an incredibly blunt instrument. I am absolutely understanding that we need some legal frameworks and visa requirements and immigration requirements, but I think what we currently have is a system which is not serving people well. And it also sends a generalized message of you're not welcome here, and you are a drain on the state, which is not a kind message to send, and undermines trust and confidence at a fundamental level, and is then designed to be exploited by perpetrators, but also effectively misunderstood by state agencies, those colleagues within social care, within the police, who are keen to help and support every person who is in distress. When the message is coming out from the centre that says, you're not welcome here, we have blunt instruments, and actually what we want is the only migrants that we want are people who contribute to our economy, without even mentioning the caveat that we will take the contribution, but we will not support you. That is a problem. So I am delighted to hear that you are pressing at a central level, because for me, we need a better instrument than NRPF, which leaves so many people in the cold so often.
Hold on. Can I ring you back in 5 minutes?
I muted you there, Minister.
Yeah, I'm going to have to go.
I know you are.
I want to thank Sarah, because we are widening this out. And also just to say, it is worth looking at, and maybe you could put a link into it, the green paper on ending violence against women and girls, a green paper produced by the UK Labour Party. I think you need to look at it. Interestingly, they do reference the Violence Against Women, Domestic Abuse and Sexual Violence Act, because we were there. So I think that's obviously getting out of my ministerial to a more political terrain, but I think we got, you need to look at every party.
Absolutely,
every political party. You can. We have our own, but we have our Welsh Government mission. So I think I'm going to have to leave you now, if that's
big thank you, Minister. Thank you for your commitment, and we really look forward to this fund coming into being just after Easter, with any luck.
Yes. And we'll follow up the points that you've made about the local authorities, and I see one from Debbie Beadle, so I will follow you can share that with my officials. Thank you very much,
We will
everyone.
do. I'll
Thank
put
you.
Wanjiku in
Bye.
touch. Thank you so much, Minister. So the rest of us are going to carry on. Thank you so much for coming. So we still have attendees and we have panelists here. So I'm going to check the Q&A. I don't know if everybody can use the Q&A or if anyone has a question. And if you do have a question, please pop it in the Q&A section. But I noticed, Evelyn, you had your hand up. Did you want to say something else? So we're still live and we're still recording and still broadcasting out to our audience. So Evelyn.
Thank you. I think Sarah, in a way, sort of posed my question as well to the minister. But if maybe just to add a little bit to what she said, what I wanted to suggest as well was an immediate support platform for women who just reach out and say, I'm experiencing this, like in my situation, when I received that threat of being homeless, an immediate support that does not refer to what my visa status is, but just looking at me as an individual who has a concern, entitled to protection of my human rights and my dignity as a person, to just say this, okay, we can, just like every other person who is entitled to benefit and public funds are getting that support, that immediate support that is available to say, we can come in, we can help you and give you XYZ support right now before we start looking into what my status is, how my migration is affecting me or it's not affecting me.
It's almost like a peer support network. Actually, that brings me on to a really good question to ask Sara from Welsh Women's Aid, if you'd be happy to, the Migrant Survivor Toolkit. I don't know if that is, I mean, obviously that's a tool to help people, but I'm not sure it would help with Evelyn's case. But do tell us about that, because it'd be good to understand what that is.
I'm more than happy to tell you what that is, and we do have a network that goes with it. I don't think it's quite the same thing as a peer network for survivors. And I just hearing what Evelyn says about, somewhere where you can reach out for help and support that has the answers, that doesn't ask what your status is as a first question. I guess I would flag that the Live Fear Free helpline doesn't ask those questions. That the Live Fear Free helpline is there for people who are experiencing abuse or oppression, and it has connections with specialist services all across Wales and beyond. But that said, that isn't the answer that you're looking for. So it is a route of support. And I'm very conscious that BAWSO also run a helpline. And again, it's that there is some immediately accessible free phone support. But one, do you know about it? And two, do they have the answers that you need once you get to talk to someone? So I think we are in an imperfect place. And I think for me, it's worth taking on board that perhaps there needs to be another more visible, more directly accessible route for those people who have no recourse to public funds, perhaps a pushback on that weaponization that is a resource that people who are in that place can ask questions to. Sorry, tiny bit of a sidetrack there. I'll tell you very briefly, if that's all right, about the Migrant Survivors Toolkit. So Welsh Women's Aid developed the Migrant Survivors Toolkit back in 2021, very much at the request of our members and working in collaboration with specialist support services, recognising, responding, supporting survivors with no recourse to public funds. Understanding the landscape is challenging. If you are an individual experiencing abuse and oppression, you need an effective response first time. You don't need someone to be going off and seeking information. If you are a specialist service, you are dealing with multiple survivors and may not be constantly dealing with NRPF. So how do you keep that knowledge fresh, coherent, up to date in your head? What are the rights? What are the responsibilities? Need to be really clear that this is not immigration advice, and one needs to be sort of very clear. It's not immigration advice. It's about what the different immigration statuses are and what resources are available to someone. So the toolkit is for specialist support services, which is the majority or the membership of Welsh Women's Aid, but also specialist services beyond that, who provide support and advice, emergency accommodation for women who are experiencing abuse or oppression, and not only women. So many of our members deliver services to men and non-binary individuals as well.
Thank you, Sarah. I've just spotted something on the Q&A. Sorry. It would be great if we can post a link to the toolkit in the chat. I'd love, Wanjiku, your thoughts on this question that's been posted. Sorry, Sarah, I just wanted to bring in the audience as someone has asked a question. So with the recent Rented Homes Act, housing associations are asking us for lists of women in our refuge. There's an issue here about women's details being shared and where that information goes, and even more, of course, for those who have NRPF and or irregular status. So Wanjiku, would you like to say something about that, please? Perhaps what the solutions are?
You know, the Renting Home Act affects women with no recourse to public funds and the organizations that support them in different ways. There's good and bad in it, in that the first and foremost, what has been said about women with no recourse to public funds is that because they have no income, then they cannot sign a rent agreement. And this disadvantages them, because if they don't have a rental agreement, it means that they can be taken advantage of. In the same way, if a housing provider or a refuge provider like ourselves, if we supporting them in our refuges, again, we're not protected in that they haven't got a license agreement with that. So how do we move them on? How do we ensure that they move on to the move on accommodation? And especially when they're not recourse to public funds, it's harder to move them on if they haven't got a specific immigration status. We know that with women who are on a spousal visa, it's very easy to regularize their status, and we get them to get DDVC concession that allows them to seek housing. But there are other women in other categories, and it's such a long conversation about no recourse to public funds, because the women that end up going to the refuge are the lucky ones. These are women who are on spousal visas, but you have other women who are on a student visa, for example, women that are overstayers, women that have been trafficked into the country. Once they come into our support, we're not able to change their status immediately, because the Home Office only allows for women on spousal visas to change their status around. So these women are still not looked after. Even the Act doesn't protect them from anything, because if it says that they don't have a contract, that even puts them into more trouble. And what they will do, they will go looking for accommodation in places where they will be taken advantage of. And I'm very sorry to hear your story, Evelyn. At the point when you saw that accommodation, you're a student, and I'm not downplaying your experience, but can you imagine if you're a woman fleeing domestic abuse with your children, and you have somebody running after you who is a perpetrator? So there's still a lot that needs to be done to protect women with no recourse to public funds. Even when it comes to Renting Homes Act, it protects people with recourse. It does, because then they can move on and go to these other places, because they can sign a contract. They're covered by their license agreement. Women with no recourse to public funds are not covered by that. I don't know what to think about that, Sara.
You want to come in there, Sarah?
Sorry, I was trying to find the button. Yes. I completely agree about the idea that when you've got multiple different arrangements and only one of them is easy to be regularized, that we don't have a clarity for other people. And just noticing some of the questions and comments in the chat, this is not only related to the Renting Homes Act, it's also related to a lack of clarity about what are public funds and what support is available to individuals, because there are some things which are legitimately available and accessible, but that is sometimes unclear, and we are compromising survivors' rights, and creating a second-class citizen status for those who have no recourse to public funds. And the point about refuge is a place of safety and security, and refuge providers are entrusted with that information, and that should be an exceptionally limited pool of who knows who is where. That is the point that, you know, has been born out of years of experience, and not because we presume that everybody is dangerous, but when someone is escaping abuse, the best starting point is to presume that everybody is dangerous, and to limit the flow of information. So just noticing the question that was posed, or the point that was raised by Cardiff Women's Aid in the chat, that idea about asking for survivors' details and passing them on to a wider circle, for me, is inherent with risk, and is everything that we've worked for so many years to put in as a safeguard, and it feels like we're widening that gap for no recourse to public funds survivors, but also we are compromising that for all survivors once we start sharing that information in an unnecessary way. And
Absolutely.
I would also echo Wanjiku's comments. Evelyn, thank you for sharing your experience, but that is not where you should find yourself. That is not where any person should find themselves. And important and powerful to have heard it, but there is always going to be the rogue out there willing to exploit. It's about us as a society making that as preventable as possible, and giving people the option to report safely, effectively, and for those individuals who are willing to exploit to be held to account.
Thank you so much, Sarah, and thank you, Wanjiku. Thank you to the Minister who had to leave a little earlier. It's been a brilliant session. To me, what it seems to be saying is we need to abolish this whole category of no recourse to public funds. It isn't working. It's discriminatory. Seems to me it's against the Equality Act 2010. Just listening to what's been said. So I would like to see government in Westminster actually abolish this. Wouldn't that be amazing? I'm not an expert like Wanjiku and Sarah, so I hope I haven't said the wrong thing, but that seems to me what's needed. I'm really pleased that we've got a commitment on record from the Minister that the crisis fund should be set up in April. So that's fantastic. And I really hope that does happen. I just wanted to mention, so having said thank you to Wanjiku and Sarah, I also want to thank, of course, Joyce and Evelyn, my fantastic colleagues from Women's Equality Network Wales. They bring so much to our work, and they are fantastic to work with. So thank you for being here on the cafe. Thank you also to my colleague Jess, who's been in the background, doing the kind of back office bit of this. I just wanted to encourage everybody still here, please do remember to join WEN Wales. If you're not already a member, it's free to do so. And also we have a celebratory event on March the 10th, which is our salsa night, and we would really love you to come along to the Temple of Peace and celebrate International Women's Day with us. It would just be really lovely to see you there. I'm going to put the link in the chat. And yeah, a huge thank you to our panelists for coming. And I really hope people have found this event useful and informative. So diolch yn fawr iawn. Thank you so much, everyone.